Hi, I'm Simon K. Jones, and you're listening to the audio version of Tales from the Triverse. And this is Alliances, Part 2. London, Mid-Earth, 1980, June. The tunnels began far outside of the city, the entrance well hidden in the reeds and pools of Raynham marshes. Watch closely on a moonlit night, and the spiked ridges of large animals could be seen drifting through the waters, emerging from the Thames only momentarily before disappearing below ground. On other continents, it would be a reasonable assumption to think that crocodiles were on the hunt. These were not crocodiles, and the underground Koth resistance fighters were far too clever to be out on moonlit nights. An average Koth was well over 6 feet tall and could hold their breath for several minutes at a time without any significant effort. That made an approach through the marsh and the flooded cave entrance considerably easier than it was for former detective Yannick Clark, who was exceedingly human and getting too old for this shit. Are you certain there's no other way in? He stared at the scuba diving equipment, turning the goggles and rebreather over in his hands. Gancran smirked and patted the man on the back. We didn't want it to be overly welcoming for humans for obvious reasons. No offence intended. I don't blame you, Clark said, fixing the mask over his face, but if I drown before we get this revolution on the road, it's your fault. The bulky Koth was already wading through the water towards the tall reeds. Night hung on the marshes, a concealing blanket that hid them from prying eyes. Besides, Raynham Marshes was far enough from London to be beyond the view of the city overwatch. They'd provided Clark with a wetsuit, one which most decidedly was not intended for his somewhat imperfect frame. By all rights, he should have been down the pub, or at home watching the rugby, comfortably retired on a police pension. If he had finished the job after Callahan's death, or even before, would he really have been able to sit back and ignore the world burning all around? Would the distraction of television and sport and beer have been enough to ease his conscience? Then again, he sometimes wondered whether he'd even had one prior to meeting Callahan and Styles. Something had changed, slowly, imperceptibly, rewiring his brain. He saw the world differently than before. They always said that you became more fixed in your ways, more rigid in your thinking as you got older, more reactionary, more conservative, more fearful and suspicious of change. Clark had absolutely been on that path until being derailed by two young upstarts with their meddling optimism. Callahan had died for it. Styles came about as close as she could have. If anything, their predilection for hope had been repeatedly shown to be foolish and naive. And yet... He fixed the breather into his mouth and took a couple of test breaths, then showed a thumbs-up sign to Gancran. Clark was led through the reeds, which stretched well above his head, the water of the marshes freezing. He ground his teeth and tried not to think about leeches and ticks and Lyme's disease. He didn't even know if any of those things were found in Raynham Marshes, and didn't want to know. In one hand he carried a hopefully waterproof case, containing, among other items, a change of clothes. The soft ground dropped away, and then he was swimming, following the flicking tail of a Koth as it sliced through the water just ahead. There had been a time, not all that long ago, when this exact scenario would only have played out in a nightmare. He kept his breath steady as his head dipped below the waterline and flicked on his mask's head torch. The water was thick with life, a soup of drifting plants and skittering tiny things that might have been fish or insects. He tried not to think about any of them getting inside his wetsuit. A dark hole loomed ahead, and he followed Gancran into the tunnel. There was some solace in the knowledge that one way or another he was unlikely to be coming back this way. After what might have been 20 metres, but felt like a mile, the tunnel began sloping upwards, and he found himself crawling on all fours out of the water. He remained on his knees for a few seconds, still on the breather, then removed the unit from his mouth and pulled off the goggles. "You did well, detective," Gancran said, offering a hand to help him up. "Not my natural habitat," said Clark, wiping water from his eyes. "Your loss," the Koth said. "On Palinor we make our nests in the sides of mountains or the depths of canyons. The Apalan Abyss was both. Endless networks of tunnels dug over hundreds of years, thousands in some of the oldest colonies." They sighed wistfully. Some of us think we should have stayed in those tunnels and never ventured down to the Ainfaran human settlements. Clark started trying to extricate himself from the ill-fitting wetsuit, which suddenly felt very tight. And you? I'm an economist, Clark, and a pragmatist. My world is numbers and logic and prediction, or it was. They flexed their wings, the red feathers shuddering in the gloom. Shaking droplets to the ground. Times change. Society moves on. We keep some things, discard others. Nothing stands still. Nodding, Clark grunted. Taken me a while to notice, but I think you've got a point. He unzipped the waterproof bag and pulled out his dry clothes, then started changing into them. So now what? The tunnel forked repeatedly until Clark was entirely lost, but Gankran seemed confident. Clark couldn't imagine a human stumbling upon the entrance, being able to find their way through the maze. He wondered if the Koth tunnels on Ceres were like this, spiderwebbing through the asteroid. They walked for miles in the dark, Clark relying on his torch, while Gankran seemed generally unhindered. The network of passageways eventually led them to a ladder. Above was a metal hatch, wide enough to accommodate a Koth. You're the first human to be shown the way, Gankran said. You might get some odd looks. Nothing I'm not used to. We're in the heart of the Koth zone, the Koth explained. This is how we get in and out unseen. Why not just get everyone out through the tunnels? It would be noticed, Gankran said, making Clark feel stupid for asking. We sometimes extract the ill or wounded, but even that is a risk. They fell silent for a moment. Many sacrifices have been made. Rubbing the bridge of his nose, Clark nodded and set his jaw. Then let's make sure they meant something. Varco laughed, the noise reverberating through the house. We are all former this or that, are we not, detective? All change, Clark said, sipping at his tea. He welcomed the warmth after the swim and the walk in the dark. All change, as you say, yes, Varco said, leaning forward in their seat. You, the former detective. Me, the former ambassador. They waved at the other Koth gathered in the room. All of us nurses or accountants or farmers or teachers. They say life is changed, don't they? I have to admit to not realising they meant it quite so literally. They were somewhere in the walled-off part of London, where Koth had been rounded up. Outside, Clark's presence would draw the attention of the guards. Inside the safe house, with its hidden tunnel connection, they could talk freely. It was Varco's base, from where he organised the supposed resistance. So, Detective Clark, Varco said, their voice sounding even deeper than he remembered. What do you bring me? Good news in these desperate times, perhaps? That's the plan, Clark said, tapping his teacup with one finger. We have a date, a synchronised series of events across the Triverse. It's a risky thing, but we think it might work. But only if it all happens at once. Varco smiled, but it was one of regret. All of us coming together for the common good, yes? Seems a little late in the day, but tell me of your plans, and of your friends. Let us plot, and scheme, and see if we can create some mischief. It is, after all, long overdue. Thanks for listening. You can leave a comment and find loads more and support the book over at simonkjones.substack.com.